Kalai Vanakkam. And good morning. So, yeah, this is a different kind of presentation than I normally do because you're all Ramana devotees, and many of you are Indian and have a lot more experience probably with temple traditions than I do. So as Janet said, I would like to have this as a kind of interactive session where we're learning from each other and each is sharing our insights and questions with the rest of the group. My presentation will be on the Annamalaiyar temple at Tiruvannamalai. The genesis for the documentary that I ended up making was that, as I think is the experience of many Westerners who go to Tiruvannamalai, they go to the ashram, they go to the caves, they might do production around the mountain, and then sooner or later somebody takes them to the temple, or they wind up in the temple. It's usually not the primary destination, right, for Westerners. For Indians, yes, but not for Westerners. So, like many people, my first experience of the temple was overwhelming. It's a magnificent architectural marvel, but it's also a magnificent spiritual experience. And I'll just share with you what happened to me, because I think this is not atypical. I had read Search and Secret India in 1971, many years ago, and immediately hatched the idea, the longing to go to Arunachala, just immediately. Now it took me about another 30 years before Arunachala sort of prepared the ground so that I could go there. So I was with a group of people. We were doing a temple tour of Tamil Nadu, as many Westerners do. That's one of the things you do in Tamil land, is you go to the temples, the Shiva temples. And the people I was traveling with were colleagues from the university, all math professors, and fairly secular in their orientation. They were mainly interested in going around India to eat food, to look at some dancing, some cultural dances, and it was with great trepidation that I convinced them to go to a few temples. Okay, so this is not a particularly receptive group of people to go to temples with, but they were, they indulged my love of temples. So we went to Tiru, and they were complaining about the mosquitoes at the ashram, and they were unimpressed. But that evening, we were only going to be there. It was on Christmas Day. We were only going to be there for about 48 hours, and I went to the temple. And I didn't know what time it opened and closed. It was about 9 p.m., so getting close to closing time. And I walk in, and it's deserted. There's nobody there. I mean, there still are a few lights, but it's largely dark and deserted. And somebody walked by and said, "We're closing, we're closing." I was really disappointed. I thought, I've come all this way after all these years, and I go into a dark and empty temple, and it's closing. So I just stood there for a while. They didn't throw me out. They just sort of hinted that I should leave. So I stood there for a while, and all of a sudden this man appeared. And he came up to me and he said, "Would you like to go in for darshan in the lingam?" And I was, yes, that would be good. And he took me, at the time it was like a labyrinth. And he took me through all these side doors, and finally we ended up, just me and him, in the inner shrine of the main temple, the Garbhagriha, the Holy of Holies. And I don't exactly recall what happened, but it was significant. And that was my introduction to the temple. Just this mysterious man that appeared, and as soon as he got me out of the temple, he disappeared. I mean, I was looking around, I turned around to thank him, and he was no longer there. This kind of thing happens there. So on subsequent visits, I would always go back to the temple, but it was a mystery to me. the iconography, the architecture. I knew something was happening energetically there that was very powerful, but I didn't understand the symbolism, and I didn't understand the Shilpa Shastras and the way that temple architects construct a sacred space like that. So I tried to educate myself. There aren't a lot of sources on that particular temple, written sources, at least in English. So I tried to educate myself. I interviewed people. I took a lot of tours and so forth, and slowly started to put together, some kind of an understanding of what was happening there. And my main motivation was to actually prepare a documentary for people who were going to go and visit Annamalaiyar, and people who were going to go and go through the temple for the first time, so that they would have some kind of preparation, some kind of sense of what they were getting themselves into. It makes a difference, if you have some kind of an appreciation for how this temple was constructed and what it's designed to do. So that was the motivation for making this documentary, was really to help Westerners orient themselves to the temple when they came to Annamalaiyar, so that they wouldn't be just, there's nothing wrong with being dumbfounded and amazed, but it's also helpful to have some kind of a grasp of what this thing is designed to do. So that's why I made the documentary. That's what I'm going to share with you today. What I'd like to do, I'm going to do a few preparatory comments, but then I'm also going to just show you the film and stop it along the way and augment some of the points that are being made in the film. And it's at that point that I would welcome your questions and your comments, your additions, your suggestions about anything that you think is important to address as we go through the different prakarams or courtyards of the temple. Okay, so I want it to be very interactive. I'm in no way the expert here. I understand a few things, but I'm sure that many of you have experiences and understandings and education about temples that I don't have, so I would really appreciate it if you would share it with the rest of us as we go through. Okay? That makes sense? All right. It's wonderful to be able to speak in a room that has a shrine set up to Bhagavan. I'm going to see if I can incorporate that in some of my classes in a subtle way. I'll have to be careful. So I wanted to make a few introductory comments, okay, that I think are really important to understand what's happening at this temple. And I'm just going to do this very quickly, but I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Shaiva Siddhanta tradition. Certainly if you're Indian, you're familiar with this. And this is something that a lot of Westerners don't understand very well, particularly people who are drawn to Ramana Maharshi, to Bhagavan. Because he's seen in the West as an exemplar of Advaita Vedanta, right? Non-dual school of Indian spirituality. But to understand temples, you have to understand the Shaiva Siddhanta tradition, because all of the Shiva temples of Tamil Nadu are all built with an understanding of Shaiva Siddhanta principles. It's not just Advaita Vedanta that's happening in those temples. There's a whole another. I would maintain complementary tradition to Advaita Vedanta in Shaiva Siddhanta, and you need to understand that in order to understand what's happening in these temples. So first of all, the Shaiva Siddhanta tradition, I'm just going to give a very quick thumbnail sketch here. This is it's a tradition of spirituality in India where the emphasis is on Shiva, not in his unmanifest state, but in his manifested state as Mahashakti, right, the goddess of creation. So Shiva in manifestation. And as I mentioned, this is a complementary perspective to Advaita Vedanta. I have a hard time pronouncing that first word. Olivil Odukam. Okay. But some of you are probably familiar. This is a recent publication of Ramana Ashram. It's a translation of a text of about 300 years ago by Robert Butler. An excellent book, but the position taken in that text is that there is, in fact, that these two traditions, Advaita Vedanta and Shaiva Siddhanta, are in fact complementary traditions. Right? That there's ultimately they're moving toward the same goal from somewhat different different positions. So the important thing to remember about Shaiva Siddhanta is that the body, the physical body, becomes the site of spiritual transformation. It's located in the body. And so the body is read both as a physical manifestation, but also as a spiritual manifestation. Okay? And in the same way, temples in this tradition are seen as Shiva's dwelling. Shiva dwells in the temple. And in fact, the temple is a physical manifestation of Shiva. All right? When you're in that temple, you are in Shiva's body. In reality. Not just symbolically, but in reality. That's the way it's set up energetically. So you are actually entering into Shiva's body. And of course, we are a microcosm of that body. Every physical human body is a microcosm of that cosmic body. But it's aligned perfectly in these temples, in the temple architecture. So as the body of Shiva, a temple is a place of spiritual transformation, spiritual purification. So that's why people go. And of course, the ultimate purpose is to move the devotee from Maya to moksha, from bondage and illusion to liberation. And this can take place in this temple. It's called a mukti sthala, a place where you can attain final liberation. It's one of the few temples in India where that's the claim that's made. And as I mentioned, most Shiva temples in Tamil Nadu are built according to this tradition, according to this pattern. I mean, if you go to enough of them, you start to see the pattern. You understand how things are laid out. Okay, so the main thing that I want to start with is that in this tradition, each jiva, or individual person, is made up of 5 sheaths, or koshas. So we have a physical body, and then we have more and more increasingly subtle bodies. And these correlate with the 5 prakarams, or courts, at the Annamalaiyar temple. And I'm going to show you a diagram shortly to see that. But basically there are 5 levels, or 5 concentric rectangles that increasingly become smaller and smaller and more concentrated until you get to the Lingam shrine itself. So these 5 sheaths begin with the Annamalaiyar kosha. This is the 5th prakaram, the outermost prakaram at the temple. This relates to the earth element and the root chakra, the base chakra. And it correlates in terms of bodies to the physical body. Okay, so that's the outermost. The second is the pranamaya kosha. This is the 4th prakaram. It correlates with the water element. And the Swadhisthana chakra, which is the seat of emotions, sexuality, and it's also the vital or prana body. So this is why it's called the pranamaya kosha. Everybody knows what prana is, right? The sort of the life energy, the life force. The 3rd kosha is the manamaya kosha. This correlates to the element fire, and the Annamalaiyar temple is actually correlated with this particular kosha, with the Manipura chakra, the solar plexus. It has to do with conditioned thoughts, ambitions, responses, the manas, the mental body. It's not the intellect, it's the mental body. It's our responses, our kind of conditioned responses. The 4th of the koshas is correlated to the 2nd prakaram, and this correlates with the air element. You have the 5 elements in Hinduism. And this is the anahata, or heart chakra. It has to do with intellect, discernment, and the analytical mind. And then the Holy of Holies, the Garbhagriha, is called it correlates with the Nandamaya kosha, the bliss body. All right? And this is the 1st prakaram, and it correlates with the space element, or akash, and the Vishuddha chakra. Now there's some, you can have some quibbles as to which of the chakras that each of these koshas relates to, but basically it's the first 5. Right? And this, of course, is where self-awareness can take place, in that Lingam shrine. That's what it's designed to do when you go into that Holy of Holies, is to sort of still the mind and give you a direct experience of the self. Okay, so I just wanted to start off with that so that you have an idea of sort of how the temple is designed. Let me show you one other thing here. So you can see here, this is the layout of the temple if you're looking at it from directly above. So you can see it's laid out sort of as a rectangle. The earliest part of the temple is the Holy of Holies, the lingam and the shrine that was built around the lingam. Nobody knows exactly when that was, but most people think that that smallest temple was built in the 9th century. So we're talking about 1,000-year-old construction period. I mean, in other words, it develops and is built over a 1,000-year period to its present form. So this is the first prakaram, right in the center here. The second is a kind of temple with a few halls built around the Garbhagriha. Then there's the third prakaram, the fourth prakaram, and the fifth prakaram. So as you can see, they're sort of, it's built according to a cosmic plan, the cosmic human, the cosmic Shiva, with the 5 koshas. And so I think it's just important to have that in mind when you're viewing the film, because it'll make a lot more sense, because I reference the prakarams and some of these different koshas and so forth in the film. Anybody want to say anything or ask any questions at this point?
I have a question. So you said it was built over a 1,000-year period, but it was built according to this cosmic plan, Saiva Siddhanta tradition. So was that plan fully formed at the time of the first prakaram?
You know, I'm not enough of an expert
Okay.
on the development of temple architecture to be able to answer that definitively. But my sense is that the initial plan was there from the beginning, but it just took wealthy patrons to actualize it.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, various
Yeah,
kings
sure.
and so forth to build each of the prakarams step by step. But it took a long time. I mean, this is a very expensive undertaking, and of course these kingdoms were having periodic wars with other kingdoms, and sometimes the resources couldn't always be allocated to temple building.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
The 9th century date for the innermost shrine. So many of the Tamil, the 63 saints, have gone to Arunachala to sing, right? And most of them are dated 5th, 6th, 7th centuries by that time.
Yeah, the
They've
lingam,
all gone
the,
to-
the lingam was there. We don't know how long the lingam has been there. It's a Svayambhu lingam.
Okay.
It's a self-manifested lingam. That according to the mythology, traditions, you know, with the manifestation of Shiva as a pillar of fire, and then leaving a condensation of that in the lingam, that could go back thousands and thousands of years. But in terms of the dating of the temple itself, the first kind of shrine was built around the lingam, they think, in the 9th century. But, you know, again, these, you know, if you know anything about Indian history, it's hard to date things. You have inscriptions that can really help at the temple, but even those inscriptions aren't always completely accurate. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, we don't know how long that lingam has been there. I mean, in one way, you could say it's been there since the creation of the world, right? Since this manifestation of Shiva as a pillar of fire, which is commemorated at this temple, takes place at the origins of the universe, right? So.
Well, I thought it was Annamalaiyar, which was the first. That
Annamalaiyar.
Annamalaiyar is an older temple.
is much older than this.
Yes. I think he's 2,000 years old.
Yeah.
Most of you are familiar with Annamalaiyar. It's the small town on the western side of the mountain, and it has a very beautiful Shiva temple there as well. But it is supposedly, according to scholars, it's much older than the Annamalaiyar temple. And you should, if you go to Annamalaiyar, you should definitely go to the temple at Annamalaiyar. It's a very special place.
Is that the temple where the lingam first was located at?
I think so. That's the
I-
story.
Yeah, there is a tradition like that. There's a
And then it
tradition.
was moved
And then it was
here.
moved to here, yeah. But again, these are back in the hoary past, and it's hard to know exactly. There are lots of traditions. That's the thing I find fascinating about India, is that there are layer upon layer upon layer of traditions. And they don't always agree with each other, but everybody seems okay with that. Okay. We have multiple perspectives here, and no need to fight about it.
In my home, we have 4. 4 people follow.
I mean, I'd be interested, I mean, how logically, how do you deal with that? Or is it just not a problem?
You forget about it.
Yeah.
It's all in suspended animation. Just leave it, let it be.
What's that?
Just leave it, the suspended animation. Okay, you can have this opinion, you can have that opinion, just
Yeah.
leave it hanging in there.
So in other words, it's not important necessarily to work out the fine details in these traditions, right? It's okay to have multiple perspectives.
Whatever suits you best.
I do think the spiritual practices have evolved over 1,000 period. During a particular period, it was very fine, detailed, and the next generation adopted a next set of practices.
Yes.
So today we have a summation of all those practices with different
Yeah.
writings, with no clear timelines. It appears very hazy.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. At different periods, certain practices were emphasized and were all the rage. And then, 100 years later, you have partisans from a different, that gain the ascendancy, and those practices fade into the background somewhat, but there's still evidence and there's still traces. And so, yeah, it becomes, from our perspective in time, and present time, it becomes somewhat hazy, yeah, somewhat confusing. I'm going to pass around a couple of microphones so that those of you who have comments to make or questions
I
can
don't
get.
know how to activate
Oh, you don't?
more
Okay.
than one phone, more than one
Okay.
mic. Rohit,
Test one,
whatever.
two.
Oh, there
Test
we go.
1, 2.
Ah, there you go.
It's a miracle. Does anybody, why don't you hang on to one of them here?
He did the magic.
I just turned on the button. And test one.
Oh, again?
Test.
No, okay, that's yours.
Test. Okay, yeah, so I guess we're just gonna have one. But maybe when you have comments or questions, for those of you who don't have booming, commanding voices, we can pass those around, that microphone around.
So adding to Rohit's comment about the original plan, most of the temples have a pattern which we have observed especially in South India, is that the pillars or the gopurams, they all evolved around the 14th and the 15th century.
Yeah.
So that is where most of the activity happened to strengthen all the buildings around. So that gives an idea that probably there was a plan, master plan, and they had identified, but as you pointed out, due to lack of resources or due to lack of support from the political situations that are prevailing at that time, they weren't completed. But after that, they consulted the experts who knew the shastras, agama shastras, and then that's how.
Yeah.
Just the only point I wanted to say is that the 14th and 15th, the Vijayanagara kings,
Yes.
were very.
Right. They really started the great building
Yeah.
projects. Yeah. Are most of you familiar with the Sri Meenakshi Temple in Madurai? I'm sure most of the Tamils here are. It's a very famous, just magnificent temple dedicated to Sri Meenakshi, the fish goddess, with a wife of consort of Shiva, manifestation of Ma Shakti and Parvati there. We were, my wife and I were down there in September doing some things, and one of the things I learned about that temple is that it had been destroyed, or largely destroyed, by Muslim armies, I think in the 17th century, and then it's been rebuilt since then. But at least according to my research, the Annamalaiyar temple in Tiruvannamalai was never destroyed by Muslim armies. I think there were a few shells that were lobbed into the north wall or something like that from that hill, It's sort of a little bit north of the temple. And it might have been the British who did that. I don't think, it was either the Muslims or the British. But that's the only damage that was ever done to the temple. So it was not destroyed like many other temples were, including the great temple of Sri Meenakshi at Madurai.
Arthur, you had a question?
Oh, yeah,
Should I turn it on? Oh.
yeah, why is it a rectangle shape? Is there a reason to it?
You know, I'm not sure about that. I just know that that's the way they were set up. And that's largely the design that you see from a lot of these temples. I think, you know, intuitively, you remember this temple is set on the lower slopes of Arunachala, the mountain. And I know that they were, at least initially, there were water courses that would bring rainwater off the mountain and into the temple tanks. And of course, it was sacred water because it had flowed down the body of Arunachala. And so it was seen to have healing properties and so forth. So possibly it was set up that way to funnel the water more, sort of more economically or more strategically into the temple. But I'm not exactly sure. Does anybody know why it was set up as rectangles as opposed to a square, for example?
I've heard that it represents our body. So the temple is, the head to the toe. So that's
Yeah, and
why
our
it's-
body is more rectangular shaped, you're right.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Yeah, that would make sense. And particularly if the temple is a physical manifestation of the body of Shiva and of every human body, then it would make sense that it would be rectangular that way.
Jim has studied Vastu.
Ah, okay.
Little bit. Why is it rectangle, but really it's two squares?
Oh.
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah, two squares.
So it's all based on squares.
Squares.
Thank you, thank you. It takes an architect or a builder to see the obvious here. Well, yeah, that's a good point. I do know that.
Everything's based on a square.
Yeah, square is the basic symbol of manifestation in matter. The stability of the square.
And spinning squares.
Yeah. Yeah, the divine is the circle, and the square is the material manifestation.
What is a spinning
The earth.
square?
Squares are spinning too. Squares spinning, that's the basic construction form. It's square, and then the squares changing and spinning.
Yeah, and most of you are familiar with Mount Meru,
Yeah.
the little murtis of Mount Meru, and if you look at that you see all these squares and triangles, that sort of ascend into heaven, and that's a picture of the whole universe. It's the manifestation of Mahashakti, the mother goddess, Shiva in manifestation. And it's interesting that Mount Meru murti is inside the Garbhagriha in Tiruvannamalai, and it's taken out every night into this marriage chamber where the murti of Annamalai or Prakriti comes in, and they're put on a swing, and they spend the night together, and in the morning they're taken back to their separate things. So that's really important, because again, it's and we'll talk about this later, but there's this coming together of Shiva and Parvati into one body that takes place at Tiruvannamalai. The symbolism is very, very powerful, and this is why Tiruvannamalai and the Annamalaiyar temple are so significant in this whole in the whole grid of Shiva temples in Tamil Nadu. I mean, it's a very powerful place. Okay, well, does anybody else want to say anything or ask any question before we move on to looking at the film itself? Okay, so we'll just take a look at the beginning part of the film. There's actually two parts to the film. They're each about 45 minutes long. We're going to be looking at the first one this morning and the second one in the afternoon. So I'll just go through, we'll just go through this, and I'll stop at various points along the way to add something something new I've learned in the 2 years since the film was made. Oh, by the way, there will be a version 3.0. This is version 2.0, but I was able to shoot a lot of high definition film this last 4.5 months that I was there, including of the Deepam Festival. So I'll be doing a version 3.0. Should be out maybe by next summer. India is a land of pilgrimage to sacred sites. Pilgrims visit these sites to experience darshan, seeing and being seen by divinity. They report that these darshans are accompanied by feelings of solidarity with other worshippers and a transmission of spiritual blessing. The darshans also reaffirm traditional beliefs and practices, some of which go back thousands of years. Pilgrimage to a temple is a journey of transformation that is believed to harmonize the individual with divine reality, so that earthly life comes to reflect the perfection of the cosmic pattern. Temples are laid out according to strict codes of construction, including units of measurement, the siting of water tanks, streets, walls, and worship areas. Strict guidelines also govern the materials used to create the temple murtis, or images of divine beings. Only specialists knowledgeable in the Shilpa Shastras, the scriptures governing temple construction, are allowed to oversee and participate in temple construction. Many of India's great temples are located in city centers, showcasing a belief that the divine reality is at the center of all aspects of human life. Temple complexes are often understood to be microcosms of the cosmic human, images of the divine macrocosm. This film focuses on one of the most significant temples in South India, the Annamalaiyar temple of Tiruvannamalai. Sorry about that. If I get back to where the temple is. So I just wanted, while we have this overview, I wanted to just emphasize again where the prakarams or the courtyards are. So this is when you come in, this is the outermost or fifth prakaram. Then this is the fourth prakaram, the third prakaram. The second prakaram is inside of the Shiva Sanadi, and then the actual lingam shrine itself is right here. And you can see there are these little towers or vimanas above each of those main shrines in the second and first prakaram. So this is the Vimana, and we'll see a close-up of that a little bit later, but this is the Vimana right over the Lingam shrine. Then there's one over the image of Shiva and Parvati. There's one over the image of Nataraja, the dancing Shiva. And these are, and these are very, very important docking stations. And it has to do with the energizing of the Murtis, with cosmic energies and energies from the mountain. And we'll get into that also a little bit later. But this just gives you an idea of what we're talking about with prakarams. You see all the different courtyards there. It's really a city within a city. And in fact, during periods of invasion, the people of the town would take refuge inside of some of the 1,000-pillared hall because it was a safe place if there was an army that was attacking, because you had the big walls and so forth. Complexes are often understood to be microcosms of the cosmic human, images of the divine macrocosm. This film focuses on one of the most significant temples in South India, the Annamalaiyar temple of Tiruvannamalai in Tamil Nadu state. It is one of 5 Shiva temples collectively called Panchabhuta, each dedicated to one of the 5 elements of Hindu cosmology. The temple at Tiruvannamalai represents the element fire and is dedicated to Shiva, the supreme reality for many Hindus, and to his consort Parvati. In the fire temple, these deities are known by their local names, Annamalaiyar and Unnanamalai Ambal. subsequent documentaries in this series. So just to make a point here that our Indian friends will already know very well, each deity has many, many different names. It's very confusing to Westerners. When you go into India and you start hearing all these different names for the same deity. But it's regional variation. Each village, each town has its own way of articulating the supreme deity. And sometimes localities have 4 or 5 or 10 names for the same deity. So that's, when we say Annamalaiyar is the same as Shiva and Annamalai is the same as Parvati, that's just the local version of in that particular locality for those deities.
So Ramana just published a small document which collected 108 names for Arunachaleshwara, so just to confuse the listeners.
Yeah, and oftentimes they're used in a devotional context, in sort of these hymns and poems that are meant to praise the deity. And then, it's sort of like with Christians, if you think about the different names for Jesus, Lord of Lords, King of Kings, Prince of Peace, Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ, and so on. It's not like that's completely unknown in Western religions, but it's very, very much the case in India. Each of these deities has many, many different names, and they all describe a different facet or quality of the deity. Yes.
The translation that's 1008 names or 108 names itself is a mistranslation, because it's not names. They would have one name and then the qualities
Yes.
of those names
Activities.
are decided separately. So when you say 1008 names of Lalita, that's not actually names. These are Lalita's qualities as Uma. What are her qualities as Uma?
Yeah.
What are her qualities as Parvati?
Yeah.
So these are the qualities, and I think that translation names throws people off.
Yes. Well, in Islam you have 95 names of Allah that are used in the Quran, and Sufis use these when they're chanting, their zikr. They will use different names of Allah to emphasize certain qualities of the divine being. So yeah, it's a very similar idea. Thanks.
One quick one. Why 108?
Yeah, well, 108 is a sacred number. I know it's, in terms of chanting mantras, and there's a lot of emphasis put on that number 108.
There is a scientific thing like the distance to sun, something like that. Yeah. There's a scientific reason to it, that the distance from Earth to sun, when you divide, it comes to exact 108.
Always multiple of 9.
Multiples of 9, yeah, Nava.
9 12.
9 planets, and the distance between Earth and Sun, it came in an article, it is scientifically proven by NASA.
Yeah, so it's a number of fullness and completion. Yeah, the whole, representing the whole. So there are, so the film mentions the Panchabhutas, the 5 elements. So earth, water, fire, air, and akash, or space. And there are 5 Shiva temples in Tamil Nadu, each of which emphasizes one of those elements. The temple at Annamalaiyar, at Tirunamalai, is the fire element, the fire lingam. But if you go to, for example, Tiruchi, where the water lingam is, you actually go down a stairway. There's a river that flows around it. It's actually on an island, and the waters of the river actually flow around the lingam, and it's a completely different feeling that you have when you're there from the fire.
Tiruvannakavi.
Yes.
Tiruvannakavi.
Yeah. And similarly with the air lingam, the akash lingam, and so forth. Yeah. And I'm going to be making future documentaries on each of these other 4 element temples, but that's underway.
Did you have any observations about the locations of these temples?
Yeah, they're all within, I think it's 119 kilometers of each other. So there's a circuit. Actually, the film will say that. And people will visit the temples in a circuit over a period of time. But one of the special things about the Annamalaiyar temple is that there are small shrines to each of the other four elements. So you can complete the visit and sort of the purification of the five elements within you just within that one temple. And you don't have that in the other ones.
So within the temple.
We'll focus on the earth temple in Kanchipuram, the water temple in Tiruchi, the air temple in Sri Kalahasti, and the Akasha or space temple at Chidambaram. Pilgrims visit these temples in a circuit, with each temple lying about 120 kilometers from the next temple in the circuit. For Hindus, the five elements are the basic building blocks of creation that in varying combinations form the subtle and gross bodies of human beings. By visiting these temples, many pilgrims believe they are purifying the five elements within them and opening themselves to divine blessings.
We are built out of these five elements. So for me, that is a way to relate, or to relate to the transformation in the body. These elements are there, and they have to be brought to life. For me, for example, the fire lingam here in Ramana is extremely strong, extremely intense and purifying. I mean, each time I go in the inner sanctum sanctorum, and I'm going a lot, because we have lots of people taking there, it feels like something is burning me up there in a really strong way. And the same impression I have when I go to the Nagarasha temple, for example, in Chidambaram, or the Waterlingam in Trichy. That's the three ones that I have seen most. The other two I've seen missing once. But these places are, I mean, for me, the Waterlingam, I'm sitting there and I'm feeling like washed. I'm feeling like washed over. It's a completely different energy than the Jyotirlingam here, the Firelingam. It's so different. And still, it all has, for me, it all has to do with purifying. And like in a certain way, these elements are alive in our body, and they have an influence. They have a strong purification influence.
So this is a very important point he's making. So again, according to the Shaiva Siddhanta tradition, right, you're constantly purifying the five elements within you, so that there's less obstruction between you, the jiva, and the awareness of the self. Right, it's a purification process, burning up vasanas, right? And so by going to these temples and having darshan at the various lingams, a deep purification process is happening. At least that's the theory, right? I'm not sure everybody's aware of that as they attend these temples, but that's the theory of what's happening energetically within the subtle body. But again, that's something that you wouldn't necessarily learn about in Advaita Vedanta, but you learn about that in the Shaiva Siddhanta tradition. And these temples are built with that understanding.
If we are just expose ourselves to this.
Sorry?
Who is this, by the way?
Oh, this is a German devotee who has lived in Tiruvannamalai many years, and he takes Western pilgrims to the Panchabhutas. Again, as part of this purification process. That's a bit controversial, I guess you could say, to take Western spiritual tourists to these places, but well, you all know what's going on in India with regard to that, and that's a discussion for another time. Did anybody else want to say anything about these four other element temples? Each one is quite magnificent. Temples in India are always connected to mythological stories that explain why a particular place was chosen for a sacred enclosure. The fire temple is located at the base of a red granite mountain called Arunachala, which means crimson mountain. Pilgrims believe it represents the fire of wisdom that burns away ignorance and brings final liberation by awakening awareness of one's true nature. The Puranas, stories of the gods of India, describe the origin of the mountain. In the distant past, Brahma, the creator god, and Vishnu, the preserver god, argued as to who was greater. This controversy threatened cosmic order. Out of compassion for all living beings, Shiva, the god of regeneration, appeared as a pillar of fire before the two contending gods. Out of the blazing light, Shiva's voice challenged Brahma and Vishnu to find the pillar's upper and lower limits. Whoever did so would be acknowledged as the supreme god. Vishnu took the form of a boar and began tunneling into the ground to find the pillar's lower limit. Brahma shapeshifted into a swan and soared high into the heavens, looking for the pillar's upper limit. After 1,000 years, neither could find the limits. Humbled by his failure, Vishnu acknowledged Shiva as the supreme god. Brahma lied and claimed he had seen the summit of the pillar. His lie was exposed and he stood humbled before Shiva. He too acknowledged that Shiva was the supreme god of all. Vishnu and Brahma then asked Shiva to remain visible as a tejo or fire lingam in the place where he had appeared as the pillar of light. With this tangible sign, they and other devotees could worship him, overcome their negative tendencies, and attain final liberation from the cycle of rebirth. Shiva agreed to this request and manifested as a pillar of fire at the place of his manifestation, Annamalaiyar. So this is something that you're probably familiar with as devotees of Arunachala and Bhagavan, but this is the importance of Arunachala. It's where Shiva manifested as a pillar of fire, right, demonstrating the ultimate supremacy of the one reality. And because we're in Kali Yuga now, it's no longer a pillar of fire because people only see with their material eyes, they don't see with their spiritual eyes, and so it's been crystallized into this red granite mountain. But it's the ultimate fire lingam, the mountain itself, and then the concentrated form of that is the fire lingam within the temple. Okay, so that's really important, and this is the Ur myth, the original myth. Or myth, sacred story, but however you want to put it, because myth has negative connotations in English, but this is the basic story, the spiritual story behind the significance of this place and this mountain. So it's always important to keep that in mind.
As a Westerner, I didn't understand. I heard the story, fine, but it wasn't until you explained that story, what the story represented was the story of transformation. So if you can expound in that, I don't know if I'm the only one that I'm not.
It's going to come here in the film in a second, but it has to do with what each of the boar or Vishnu symbolizes and what Brahma, the swan, symbolizes, and both of them finally submitting to the self. But we'll get into that in just a second.
I have a question.
Sure.
Because I'm ignorance upon ignorance, okay? I know nothing. I'm confused about...
You want to speak into the mic?
Okay.
So everyone can hear your question.
Okay. I'm confused about oneness, because that's what's been my message of late, is oneness. It appears to me that the gods themselves don't participate in a lot of oneness. That there's a lot of individual. What am I missing?
Yeah. Well, that's actually a great question, and certainly of great confusion to Westerners when they look at Indian the Puranas, the mythological teachings. I can't give you a definitive answer except to say that in Bhagwan's teaching in Vaidya there's only one reality.
Right.
Right, Brahman. The self, whatever you want to call it, and it's one being, it's one awareness, and it's one Ananda. It's just one, but in its manifestation in the world of names and forms, it appears as many.
Okay.
And so for most of us, that's what we see. We see the names and forms, and so we see the one as divided into all these individual entities, sort of in competition with each other, and that's the illusion. Right, so the reality is always the oneness, but people get caught up in the illusion, and the deities themselves, in some of these Puranas, get caught up in it as well. But it's all Leela, it's all play. It's like make believe, in a way, because really, can the one self, the one supreme awareness, ever forget itself in reality? Anyway, that gets into some thorny issues. Did anybody else want to say anything or add anything to that?
I think that is a talk in itself.
Yes.
Because
thank you.
The definition of Brahman, till that is understood very clearly, the confusion remains.
Yes.
And all the lectures that people do is all on Maya, and Brahman is one, but Maya is many. But to concentrate only on the definition of what is not Brahman has to be understood.
Yes.
That is between what is within space, within time, within anything that's beyond that. And there are whole scriptures on that. And once one understands the definition of Brahman, then only everything else becomes clear.
Yes.
So one of these days, maybe you'll give that lecture too.
No, that's a lifetime of. But you're right. That's the root concept, the root reality. And unless that's seen clearly, then the rest of it is a bit opaque. And this, of course, this is what Bhagavan is always pointing people away from manifestation, away from names and forms, and back to the reality of the self. Once that's established, once self-awareness is established, the rest of it becomes much clearer. But we tend to get caught up in the details, right?
Over subsequent eras, humanity lost the capacity to see with spiritual eyes, and out of compassion, Shiva manifested his fire lingam as the present-day Red Mountain, Arunachala. For followers of Shiva, this story has a deeper meaning. Brahma represents the intellect, Vishnu the ego function, and Shiva the Atman, the divine self within each human. When the intellect and ego recognize that Atman transcends these faculties, that human conceptions cannot grasp or control the divine reality, surrender and self-realization can occur. Pilgrims believe that seeing and walking around the base of Arunachala destroys the hold of the ego and leads to moksha, final liberation.
There is something about this place that has attracted very advanced devotees spontaneously over the last 1500 years at least. There's a power in this place that saints have recognized. They come here, they see it, they feel it. Jnana Sambandha wrote that it was a distillation or condensation of jnana. And Bhagavan said that was his all-time favorite description of Arunachala. So when these saints come, that they recognize something in this place that has a physical form, but is also radiating the power of reality in such a way that those who are sufficiently mature, sufficiently advanced, can tune into that and attain liberation. You probably know the famous line that those who think of Arunachala get liberation. Bhagavan accepted this, he repeated this particular maxim, and he also wrote in some of his verses that it was the thought of Arunachala that had brought about his liberation.
Another Purana story tells how Parvati, Shiva's consort, playfully put her hands over Shiva's eyes one day. Deprived of sunlight and moonlight, the physical universe dissolved. Great sages and divine beings implored Shiva to rectify the situation, and Shiva, moved by their pleas, reanimated the cosmos and restored all life. Parvati was mortified by her careless error and went to Tamil Nadu to perform penance. She found her way to Arunachala, where she began walking around the sacred mountain as a spiritual practice. Parvati also assumed the form of the goddess Durga and slew a great demon, Mahasura, who had terrorized the sacred grounds of Arunachala. When Shiva saw her sincere penance, he appeared and absorbed her into his body, creating the form of Shiva called Ardhanarishvara. Parvati asked that all who made the pilgrimage to Arunachala be forgiven of their sins. This mercy was granted and is celebrated each year during the Deepam festival in late fall, when a huge flame is kindled at the top of the mountain.
So this is another really important point, and again from the Shaiva Siddhanta perspective. This is the place where, in response to Parvati's penance, Shiva absorbed her into his body. And that's why you have that image, Ardhanarishvara, that's half male and half female. That's only in Tiruvannamalai that happened, right? I mean, according to tradition. So it's, the symbolism there is very, very powerful. Not only the manifestation of the Jyotirlingam, but also the sort of the representation of the human jiva being absorbed into the body of Shiva. That's the final liberation that Arunachala and the Annamalaiyar temple promises.
Hey, Phil, just minor correction there.
Sure.
That it's not Mahasura, it's Mahishasura.
Mahishasura, yeah.
That means, literally means demon buffalo.
I'm still working on my pronunciation. Believe me, David Godman gave me a real hard time about my pronunciation. So that was why version 2.0 appeared. But I still have some. You'll see another one coming up.
The fire temple in Tiruvannamalai is a popular destination for pilgrims and is considered an Atharastalam, a Shiva temple representing a chakra in the human subtle body. The temple contains an ancient Svayambhu or self-born lingam similar to this one. Tradition states that the lingam appeared in response to the prayers of Brahma and Vishnu after their acknowledgement of Shiva's supremacy.
So, in case it's not obvious, you're not allowed to film within the second and the first prakarams. I mean, if you really know somebody who knows somebody, you might, but you would never be allowed to photograph the lingam itself. So I didn't want to leave the viewer with nothing. So this is a lingam from the water temple in Tiruchi. It's a lingam that's a little bit outside the main shrine, but you would never be allowed to film the fire lingam or to take a picture of it. Unless somebody knows of a rogue image that's floating around somewhere. There's rumor that there is one in Tiruvannamalai that devotees of Bhagavan have, but nobody will share it. And I understand why not.
This lingam is believed to have manifested without human agency. It is permanently rooted in the Holy of Holies of this temple, and unlike the main temple images, is never brought out for processions on feast days. Since it is self-born, it does not need to be recharged every 10 years with special mantra recitations, as do Shiva lingams in other temples. This fire lingam and the entire temple embody the Manipura, or solar plexus chakra, in human spiritual anatomy. It is believed that the lingam's darshan burns away the jealousy, shame, fear, and delusion associated with this chakra when a person is under the sway of spiritual ignorance. Tradition states that the fire temple was built by Lord Vishnu over this lingam with the assistance of the spiritual architect Vishvakarma. Vishnu's role is commemorated by his Murti, the flute-playing Vengopala, which is installed just behind the lingam shrine.
So most of you who have been to the lingam shrine knows that when you come out after darshan, you walk around the shrine, and if you go straight behind where the lingam is, there's the Lingadbhava shrine. It's just opposite, on the opposite wall. There's a little alcove that you can sit in and meditate. But also, if you go a little bit further west, against that far west wall, there's a statue of Vishnu, or of Krishna, playing his flute. And that's commemorating the fact that he's the one who actually, according to tradition, inspired the construction of the temple, which is a nice way of incorporating Vaishnavism into Shaivism, right? It's like, he's a good guy, he built a temple, we respect him, we honor him, but she was the main guy.
The temple site and properties remain officially registered in his name to this day. The complex likely dates from the 9th century of the Common Era and grew to its present size over a 1,000-year period. This city within a city sits on the east side of Arunachala and occupies 10 hectares or 25 acres. The complex rests on the slight west to east slope so that rainwater drains efficiently via canals into 2 tirthams, or temple tanks, located in the 4th and 5th courtyards. The water in the tanks is believed to have healing powers, since it has come down the slopes of the holy mountain and therefore been imbued with its blessing. In the past, pilgrims took a purification bath in these tanks before entering the inner temple. Today they use 2 large tanks outside the outer walls of the temple site. The rectangular shape of the temple is oriented 13 degrees north of due east. This means that the rays of the rising sun would have entered the inner sanctum on both February 16th and October 24th, with one of these 2 dates probably marking the day the foundation stone was laid. This is not unusual in Shiva temples in Tamil Nadu, although the scriptures mandate an exact east-west axis for stalas of this type. Annamalaiyar is one of South India's largest temple complexes. The outer temple is oriented 13 degrees.
Stop here for a second. So orientation in space is very, very important in Hinduism. And so the main Gopuram, the Raja Gopuram, is faced east, and you have the North Gopuram, the West Gopuram, and the South Gopuram. Right, but there is that orientation in space, and the main axis goes from east to west, and the entrance into the temple is from the east. Then you basically move from east to west as you go into the central shrine. Each of the directions and then the medial points between them, the main directions, so northwest, southeast, and so forth, are actually guided and protected by a deity in Hinduism. And if you go around the mountain, if you do the production around the mountain, there are the 8 Ashtalingams, which are the lords of the directions, and they also provide a kind of energetic and spiritual protection for pilgrims as you're going around the mountain. And many people will stop for darshan at each of those Ashtalingams.
North of due east. This means that the rays of the rising sun would have entered the inner sanctum on both February 16th and October 24th, with one of these 2 dates probably marking the day the foundation stone was laid. This is not unusual in Shiva temples in Tamil Nadu, although the scriptures mandate an exact east-west axis for stalas of this type.